Hello virtual hunters and welcome to the ultimate beginner's guide to the Hunter Call of the Wild. And while this video is geared for beginners, I think that a lot of avid players could learn a thing or two along the way. But before we get started, we need to lay the groundwork for the entire video. Think of this as a Call of the Wild 101, with the only prerequisites being buying the Hunter Call of the Wild, installing the Hunter Call of the Wild, and having 2 or more brain cells to rub together. I am about to throw a lot of information at you, and the odds of you retaining all of it on your first watch are pretty low, which is why I've organized the entire video into chapters. Timestamps will be in the description for you to bounce around and get the information that you need later on. Make sure to save this video for future use, and if you're a YouTube Premium member, you can download it as well. So quickly, let's talk about the chapters we'll be covering in today's video. Chapter 1 is the Bare Necessities. We will cover all the basic information on how to get you set up for your first hunt. In Chapter 2, we're going to talk about animal behavior and detection, and we will learn how to close the distance on the animals you're hunting and avoid getting detected by monitoring the 3 S's. Chapter 3 is shot placement and integrity, and we'll do a deep dive into the trophy integration system and make sure that you know how to not ruin your next diamond potential animal. Chapter 4 is finding more animals, where we will talk about how and where to find any target species on any map, overall netting you more trophies in your lodge. And Chapter 5 is developing your playstyle, but more on that later. By the end of this video, you will have the knowledge to play and experience the game to its fullest potential, but before you can do that, we have to start at the beginning. Chapter 1, the Bare Necessities. When you first spawn in, you'll get a short tutorial from the game telling you to go to an observation tower and survey the area, and to go unlock an outpost. The observation towers in the game are sprinkled all over the map, and surveying from the top will illuminate a small portion of your map, and to unlock the whole thing you'll eventually need to climb all of the lookout towers, but this doesn't need to be done immediately. It's a grab them as you go kind of thing. In the meantime, fully unlocked maps can be found on Google very easily to give you a general idea of where you're going. After you've gotten your lookout tower surveyed, it will then instruct you to go unlock an outpost. To unlock an outpost, you need to navigate your way to the marker and press E on PC or whatever the prompted button is on console, I'm not 100% sure, when looking at the flagpole, or campfire for some outposts. Outposts are your home base. You can do almost everything not directly related to hunting from one of these. They are spread all over your map, and once you get the Tents and Ground Blinds DLC, you can place tents anywhere you like, which essentially act as an additional outpost. You can place up to 16 of them per map, but they are pretty expensive, so keep that in mind. Now, what all can you do from an outpost? If you go inside, you will find a bed. The bed allows you to change the time of day, which is extremely important for reasons that we'll get into later, but for now, just remember that you can change the time using the bed and paying a small fee. That fee will increase the more often you change the time in a certain period. Next, we have the storage container. Some maps have these in the same room as the bed, some of them are nearby on the outside of the cabin, but in either case, just walk towards this icon and hit the action button. This will pull up your storage interface, allowing you to buy new equipment, customize your loadouts, kennel and set certain dogs as active, and request ATVs, and a whole bunch more. In the store tab, you'll see a plethora of guns, ammo, scopes, binoculars, collars, and more to buy. Don't go too crazy here yet, but something to keep in mind when buying guns is knowing the class of ammo for each caliber. This can quickly be found by clicking compatible items below the description, or by finding the correct ammo in the ammo tab. You might not know what that means yet, but it's crucial to know where to find this information. It'll all make sense soon. From the storage tab, you can drag and drop to customize your loadout. On consoles, the button for moving things around will be displayed in the bottom right-hand corner. It's important to keep an eye on the weight of each item, because at the beginning, you will only be able to carry 20 kilograms of stuff on your person at any time. The total weight can be found here on this bar. One tip here is that stacked items will only count as one weight. So if I'm carrying 20 of one kind of tent, it will still only weigh 6 kilograms. But if I'm carrying one of 2 types of tents, they will each weigh on my total, making it 12 kilograms of tents. So stacking really matters here. I know it doesn't make much sense, but it helps us in the long run, so I'm not complaining much. From this menu, you can also customize what your character looks like. This has no impact on animal detection or environment, it is purely cosmetic. You can wear Savannah Warden outfit in the snow and a full winter ghillie suit in the middle of Africa, it makes no difference, except for showing everyone in multiplayer how cool you look. Exiting that menu, there are a few other things you need to know before moving on to the next chapter. If you hit M on PC or start on console, you'll bring up your map. You can place down a marker that will stay after you leave the map, letting you know exactly how far away and in what direction it is at any given time, and I use this feature all the time. I mark where I'm going, where I last saw an animal, where the water's edge is, etc. Speaking of the map, you'll notice after you shoot an animal, there will be a purple fog in a circle on the map. This is hunting pressure. Now, with the new update, it will tell you specifically how bad the hunting pressure is in a given area by holding your cursor over it on the map. There's low, mid, high, and dead zone pressure. Animals will try to avoid areas with high hunting pressure, and if it gets to dead zone, it will delete all the zones in the affected area. We'll talk about what zones are in the next chapter, but for now, just know that you don't want to delete zones. On average, the zone pressure will increase 1 stage for every animal killed in a certain area. So if you're shooting a bunch of deer from the same herd, you can shoot at most 3 without deleting the need zone, unless you're using a hunting structure like tripod stands, tree stands, ground blinds, or hunting blinds. This will significantly reduce the amount of hunting pressure caused by killing animals, but just like tents, are absurdly expensive when you're first starting out. Speaking of money though, how do you earn cash to be able to buy new weapons and gear? It's pretty simple. You're paid every time you shoot and collect an animal. Emphasis on the collecting. Animals will pay anywhere from 200 cash to over 1500 depending on the species and trophy score. The beginning of the game can feel a little grindy, but once you get into the swing of it, money just kind of comes naturally. So that should be enough information to get you out of the outpost, which means we can move on to our next section. Chapter 2, Animal Behavior and Detection. Okay, now we're getting into the fun stuff, but before we can dive into the why and how animals move, we have to figure out why and how you need to move, and to understand that, you need to understand the 3 S's of detection. Animals can and will detect you based on sight, sound, and smell. Each animal processes these differently. Coyotes might smell you a ways off, pheasants aren't going to run until they see or hear you. You will need to experiment with different species to figure out what senses you need to be catering to avoid being detected by them. Luckily, the game doesn't leave us out here guessing with these. In the bottom right corner of your screen, you will see the wind direction. As a rule, it's best to move in a direction where the wind scent cone, shown as a green triangle, is blowing from in front of you to your rear. In hunting, we call it walking with the wind in your face. When you're stalking, you need to make sure the animal is not in your scent cone, or they will most likely run off without having to see you or hear you. Further right, you will see a circle. This is your visibility indicator. A full circle is completely visible, and the smaller it gets all the way down to a thin gray line is you becoming more and more hidden. This can be achieved by lowering your stance, limiting your movement, or using brush and foliage as cover. The issue with using foliage as cover comes into play with the final S, and that is sound. Just to the right of that, you will see a little microphone symbol. And no, that's not the game picking up on you singing Taylor Swift's newest single. That is how much noise you are currently generating. You make noise by moving and shooting. You'll have probably figured out by now that you have 3 stances: standing, crouching, and prone. By holding the run button, you can change between the 2 speeds for each of them. You can silence almost all noise by stopping movement, but that doesn't help you get closer to the animal. It's a balancing act that you have to find out by playing, but remember that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Just be aware that foliage will be much louder than grass when moving through it. Also, remember how I mentioned ATVs in Chapter 1? Yeah, they're essentially useless for hunting, as they will spook anything within earshot, and these animals have a long range of hearing. They're great for unlocking outposts and watchtowers, but don't try sneaking up on something unless you're ready to take a running shot. Now, after you find an animal, you will need to spot it. This can be done by pulling out your binoculars and hitting your action key. This will outline the animal and display an information screen on the top right. For an animal's status, you will need to look at the second line in this darkened section. Animals in the Hunter Call of the Wild have 6 statuses that they can be in. You can think of this as a progression, and the more you scare an animal, the further down the line it goes before it branches into 2 paths, and then will eventually return to the beginning of the progression. Starting off, we have calm, and this is the natural state of all animals before you show up, and it is the state that you want them to be in when you're making your stalk. Attentive means that you did something to make them notice you, and they are now more responsive to your presence. Alert means that they know you are there and they are very responsive to your presence. They are now actively seeking you. Once an animal has entered alarmed, they are fully aware that you are there and they are entering fight or flight mode. From here is where our progression splits into 2 branches. After being alarmed, the animal will either be fleeing or aggressive. Fleeing means that they are actively running away from you, and unless you want to try and make a very dicey shot, your stalk is over. On the other hand, some animals wake up and choose violence. You can tell the animal wants to ruin your day by going into an aggressive state. Not all animals can become aggressive, but some that are bears, moose, alligators, and crocodiles, and everyone's favorite murder chicken, the capercaillie. They will be charging you, and if they touch you, you will lose a little bit of HP. Lose too much HP and you'll get sent back to the nearest outpost to think about what you've done. After an animal has either fled or become aggressive, they will return to a nervous state. This means that they will be on high alert and ready to run at the first sight of you. It's important to note that an animal can become nervous as well if they are entering into a zone with a high amount of hunting pressure. If you're stalking an animal and you see it go into an alert status, I suggest to get down and stop moving and let it return to either an attentive or, if you want to wait that long, go into a calm state before you continue your stalk. Just make sure to adjust your approach because obviously something wasn't working the first time. Okay, jumping back up to the first line, you will see one of 4 statuses: feeding, drinking, resting, or traveling. We'll dive more into these in Chapter 4, but for now, you'll notice that if you spot an animal in their zone doing one of the main 3 things, it will add a marker on your map displaying the time, animal, and type of zone. Discover as many of these as you can. You will thank yourself the more you play. Below that, on this little information bar, you'll see an estimate of the weight and the difficulty of the animal, which is a beautiful segue into our next section, Chapter 3, Shot Placement and Integrity. Looking at that information bar, you will see the weight estimate and difficulty of the animal, and I could make a whole video about this, and I probably will in the future, but for now, just know that every species has a maximum of both, and it varies for each of them. The maximum difficulty rating is either 3 easy, 5 medium, or 9 legendary. For each species, you will want to look up the maximum difficulty and weight. Personally, I use the Call of the Wild companion app for iOS, and I believe there are similar apps on Android as well. I cannot recommend using these enough. They have all kinds of information about all the species and maps that you would ever need, but finding and shooting a diamond potential animal isn't enough. Wait, what is a diamond again? Every animal is going to be graded on a metal system, either a bronze, silver, gold, or diamond. There are great ones which are even higher, but you're a long ways off from getting one of those at this point, so we'll just stick with the basics. And that is determined by the trophy rating here on the left-hand side. By hovering over the number, you can see the minimum score for each medal, but you have to pass all of your integrity checks to get the full medal score. So let's take this white-tailed deer for example. Down here under Harvest Check, you will see 4 checks that you need to pass to get full score on the animal, and it's pretty straightforward. Use the correct class of ammo for the species. In this case, we can see that a whitetail is a level 4 animal, and we used a 308 to take it down, which is class 4 through 8 caliber, meaning we passed that check. Remember when I said to keep in mind the class of each ammo in your loadout? This is exactly why. You will need to shoot the animal with the proper caliber. You can see the animal class on the trophy screen and in the top right corner of that information tab that you saw while spotting it. Always double check you have the right gun out before shooting. Okay, so we've passed the first check. Next up, we have the number of shots. You cannot shoot an animal more than twice before it dies, or you will not pass this check. Next, we have that the trophy organ is intact. This varies from animal to animal, but typically the trophy organ is either none for things like birds and rabbits, or skull for most larger game. You're not allowed to headshot the 12-point buck across the lake. Finally, and often the hardest to accomplish, is the vital check. Before all is said and done, you will whiff a shot on an animal, if you haven't already, and miss this one. It happens to the best of us, we just try and do better next time. So that begs the question, what happens if you don't pass one of these checks? Well, whatever medal rating the animal would have received will get knocked down by 1. So a diamond will be a gold will be a silver, and so on. You'll receive less money and XP from the harvest as well. So if vitals are the hardest check to pass, you're probably wondering how do you make sure that you hit the vitals every time. This will vary for each animal, but as a general rule of thumb, you'll want to aim just behind the front leg, about halfway up the body. If you're going to miss, you want to miss a little low, as the vitals are often not in the top portion, as we can see from the X-ray view here. You need to hit either the heart, lungs, liver, cervical spine, or thoracic spine, which is the neck, or the brain. But remember how I said most animals have a trophy organ check? It makes brain shots ruin the trophy score for most big game, even if you hit the vital organ. You also need to pay attention to the way an animal is standing. An animal is going to be in one of 5 positions: head on, quartering to, broadside, quartering away, or facing away. In a perfect world, you'll want to try and take either broadside shots or slightly quartering away. Head on and facing away are pretty self-explanatory. Broadside is when an animal is completely perpendicular to you, offering the most wide open shot of their vitals. Quartering away is when the animal is not quite broadside, but his butt is closer to you than his head. Essentially, he's starting to walk away from you. Quartering to is the exact opposite. And as you can tell, when most animals are quartering to, a large portion of their vitals are covered by hard bone. If you're using a caliber with enough penetration, you don't need to worry as much about quartering to, or even head-on shots in some cases, but it has to be enough to punch through either the shoulder or the breastplate. Speaking of penetration, most ammo calibers will have 2 variations. One is some kind of a soft point or hollow point, and the other is some kind of a ballistic tip. Every caliber is named something a little different, but personally, I always go with the option with more penetration than expansion. Expansion doesn't mean jack if you can't get the slug to a vital organ. But none of this stuff matters unless you can get some animals in front of you, right? So let's move on to our next section. Chapter 4, Finding More Animals. Okay, so this might be the most reviewed section of this video simply because no matter how good you are at this game, finding animals to shoot is something you can always get better at. Heck, I'm still learning myself. But there's a piece of real-life hunting advice that applies to this game so well, and that is, if you want to get the big one, then you've got to be where they'll be, which is why we need to understand need zones. Remember a few minutes ago when I was talking about those? So, at any given point, an animal can be feeding, drinking, resting, or on its way to do one of those three things, aka traveling. The zone we want to focus on is drinking. Drink times for all animals can be found on the Call of the Wild wiki or through a companion app like I mentioned earlier, but drink zones are by far the easiest to find. Let's say you want to go hunt whitetail on Layton Lakes. We can look at the map and know for a fact that the deer will be on the edge of an area that is blue sometime between the hours of 8 and 12 because that's their drink time. So you'll want to set the time for sometime between 9:30 and 10:30. Animals don't automatically show up to a zone at the start of the time. It can take them a few minutes to a few in-game hours for them to arrive at their destination. But once they do, you will normally have a wide open view of the entire herd because they are on the water's edge. Once you've spotted an animal you'd like to close the distance and get a shot on, I typically put a marker down near the animal and start to implement 3S discipline like we talked about in chapter 2 to close the distance on this animal. I will run until I'm about 200 meters out, then I'll walk until about the 115 mark. I will crouch until I'm within around 75 meters or so. From there, it's going to be a slow crawl if I need to get any closer than that. Just make sure to keep an eye on the animal as you stalk. If you see his status change, then slow down and readjust. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And remember that if you mess up and spook an animal, you can always reset the time and come back later. The animal doesn't just disappear or change zones. Eventually, they all come back. Okay, I can hear the comments already. I don't have any diamonds on my map. What can I do? Well, first of all, you do. You have diamonds on your map. Maybe 2, maybe 20, and maybe not the species you want, but they are there. Secondly, if you need new animals on your map, you really have 2 options. You can start shooting more animals, forcing respawns, which could eventually lead to more diamonds. There's a whole video coming out on my channel soon about how respawns work in the game, so make sure to subscribe if you'd like to see that. But your other option is the wonderful land of multiplayer. Multiplayer is both great and a nightmare. You will most likely get kicked from a few servers before settling into one you enjoy, but unlike other games, the Call of the Wild doesn't host their own servers. Every option you see in multiplayer is another player opening up their map. And the reason that multiplayer is great is over time you will find your own favorite spots on your own map that you check regularly, but they might not be checking the same spots. They could have a max score diamond sitting at your favorite lake because they have never stepped foot there. Something to note about multiplayer though, especially on PC, is that this game does have an issue with cheaters. From time to time, you'll see people flying around the map, teleporting animals to themselves, or worst of all, manipulating game files to spawn nothing but diamonds and rare furs and great ones. If you encounter this, the best course of action is just to find a different server. It's annoying and will ruin the fun of the game for you in the long run. Speaking of experiencing the Hunter Call of the Wild, our next chapter is developing your playstyle. But first, if you're enjoying the video, make sure to leave a like on it. It lets me know you're enjoying the content and tells me that you want more tutorials and how-tos. Videos like this take an incredible amount of time for me, and I appreciate you all for watching. But without further ado, we're on to our next section. Our final chapter is developing your playstyle. One of the best parts about games like the Hunter Call of the Wild is that there is no right way to play it. If you enjoy getting the biggest and best trophies the game has to offer, maybe you should set up a grind. If you enjoy laid-back walking hunts, then get out there and do that. If you don't believe in video game violence against animals, I mean, happy hiking, I guess? I'm not sure where you're watching this video. This video is not intended to tell you how to play your game. When I was younger, I was really into photography, and one of the things a mentor told me that stuck with me throughout my photography career was, you need to know the rules so you can decide when to break them. Which is the whole purpose of this video, to understand the basics of this game and decide how and where you want to use them. And believe me, I break these rules all the time. Don't sprint within 200 meters of an animal. You're talking to the guy who likes to ride up on hogs on an ATV and hop off and blast them with a 308 AR. Always use the right caliber? I've shot rabbits with 300 magnums. It's fun. But at the end of the day, it is a game, an open world one at that. You get to decide how your hunts will play out and how you want to manage the herds on your map. And whatever you decide is the best choice for you, is the best choice for you. Hopefully this video has given you good information so you're not wandering around aimlessly in the backwoods hating this game. There's so much to see and do, and it's a lot more fun when you have an idea of how things work. But if you've made it to the end, I'm assuming you're a fan of hunting game content, and let me tell you, you have found the right place because that is all I do on this channel. And I'd love to have you along for our next hunt, so make sure to subscribe and get notified when the next video comes out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.